Hello, my name is Amy Travis. I'm a family therapist with the Morton Center. Today we're going to be taking a look at grief and its role in active substance use and in the recovery process. So when someone is in the active use part of addiction, it's important to know that grief about any past or current experience or event can be a major fuel for addictive behavior. Sometimes the emotions that come along with grief are so overwhelming that substance use is used as an escape from those emotions, an escape from actually dealing with all of the kind of tangle of emotions that can come along with grief. Grief can also be a major trigger for relapse. Sometimes what people will find is that as they get into recovery and they start dealing with their emotions, there's some grief-related emotions that have been there for a long time, but they've been shoved down really, really deep. And when they start to come back up to the surface, sometimes they're confusing or overwhelming. And so then sometimes a relapse will occur because maybe coping skills have not yet really been either learned or integrated in a way that can really help that person deal with all of the emotions. So there is quote unquote normal life grief. These are grief experiences that usually every human will go through at some point, and that may be the loss of a loved one, that may be an illness of their own and grief that's related to that. It may be a change in a relationship, whether that's a separation or a divorce, maybe a loss of a job. So these are grief-related experiences that are common to the human experience. There are some types of grief that are more specific to substance use and all of the stuff that comes along with that in life. And that's what we'll be taking a look at today. But it's important to recognize that whether it's the individual struggling with substance use or their loved ones and family struggling with the impact of their substance use, there's often grief on both of these levels, often at the same time. So there's substance-related grief, and there's the grief that comes along with just normal human experiences. And so working on that and being able to kind of separate those two types of grief experiences is important. Recovery, the recovery process may involve processing all of these different layers of grief. And it may involve processing unresolved grief from years of use, years of active use, but just years of experiences that are related to that use. So when someone gets into recovery and starts to really look at grief that needs to be processed and experienced and integrated, sometimes what you find is that it may be grief that was never fully processed from childhood. And it may be that there's childhood grief on top of a divorce in adulthood, on top of substance-related grief. And so that's where all of those layers can make it so complicated. So something that's very important to recognize about the phases of grief that humans typically experience is that they are not linear. And there's a lot of information out there that you can find about different grief models, different ideas about what these phases are that humans go through, the emotional phases. So I'm not going to go into that too much right now, but just to point out that it's not that you experience one part of the grief process, finish that up, and then go on to the next, finish that up, and then go on to the next. The grief experience is often more cyclical. Sometimes it can be helpful to think of it as waves, waves like in the oceans, to where a big wave of emotion will hit and can feel so overwhelming, and it can feel like it's never going to go away. But just like the waves in the ocean, that particular phase will typically pass. It will recede. And then another wave of emotion, a different kind of emotion, might be right behind it. And so that kind of ongoing process, because it can, if their expectation is that I'll get through this one phase and be done and I'll never have to feel these emotions again, if that's the expectation, then I'm probably going to set myself up for a tough time. So some common emotions, and this is also in line with some of the common phases that are seen in, particularly in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of grief experience. So here's some of the common emotions that you might feel. You might feel denial, just the shock of what is going on. If we keep all of these in the framework of substance use and active use and recovery, denial might look like there's no way that this is as bad as it is. Let's say that there has been a loved one who has maybe died of an overdose. There's no way that that's happened. Just the shock of it, the shock for family of, I can't believe that our condition has gotten so bad. Along with that may come a lot of guilt, a lot of feelings of guilt, or blaming each other, or blaming an outside source, or a sense of bargaining, that if only we had done this, if only they hadn't done that, it's all this person's fault, or it's all my fault. All of that can get very tangled up together. You might feel a lot of anger and even resentment. I can't believe that this is happening in our family, and just so furious and so frustrated. Or that resentment may look like I've lost a lot of years to personal struggles with substance use, or with trying to help another person with their personal struggles with substance use. Other really intense emotions may show up as depression, or really intense sadness, or loneliness, or a sense of isolation, a sense of I'm the only one who's dealing with this. These emotions that we've just talked about, they may come in those waves, and they may come in intersecting waves. So I might feel like I've moved out of the denial phase, like the shock has lessened, and I might go into feeling really angry. And then I might try to think, okay, well, if I had done this differently, then the outcome would be different. Or maybe I should do this instead, and this will change their substance using behavior. And then out of that, I may actually slip back into denial and think, okay, see, we're okay. We're going to be fine. This problem isn't as big as I thought it was. And so then I may have to come back into, kind of cycle into another emotion to move out of that denial place, and then come right back into anger, or come back into bargaining. And so in a healthy grieving process, there will be a point at which everything that we just talked about should lessen in intensity. And then the idea that I can reconstruct my life, or I can rebuild a new future for myself without this person, or with this change in this relationship. And then along with that, an acceptance of the way things are. That does not mean approval or liking it. acceptance of reality does not mean that you have to like the way things are. But it's really being able to grapple with, okay, this is where my life is. Life without this person, or life without substances, or life with a changed family. And so along with that hope that recovery can bring a better state of health and well-being. So just know that if you are recognizing that you're experiencing grief related to substance use, all of this is normal. This whole mixture of what may sometimes feel like even conflicting emotions, to feel angry at the situation and to have hope for the future at the same time, that all of that is a normal part of the process. Now, if it felt like or feels like it stepped out of that normal process, and was settling into something like a true depression that was not lifting, then definitely talk to a therapist, get some help, get around other people who are dealing with the same kind of thing that you're dealing with, get support. So now we're going to take a look at some losses that are experienced by the person who's struggling with substance use. Loss in all different forms is a normal part of the human experience, and it's often a source of the grieving process. So often, and this first one may feel kind of counterintuitive. It may seem like, yeah, but if the substance is causing so many problems in the individual's life and in the relationships and in the life of the family and loved ones, wouldn't you be glad to not have that substance having such control in your life anymore? Wouldn't you be glad for that to be gone? But for many people, there is a real sense of loss when that substance is no longer there. For many people, that substance has been what has shown up reliably in their life, sometimes for years, sometimes for a very long time. Because sometimes people and relationships are not predictable and they're not reliable. But that substance tends to show up the same time every time. And so sometimes not having that in their lives can really feel like a big hole, like a big emptiness. Along with that might be a loss of the lifestyle. If I am in recovery from alcohol, for example, then that may mean that I'm not going out and meeting friends at bars. It may mean that my way of socializing may be totally different. And there may be some grief around that. For some people, the lifestyle that goes along with drugs and alcohol is one of just constant chaos. And sometimes that is really hard to step away from. So sometimes there's grief around the loss of a particular status that might have been achieved in that lifestyle, or kind of a roller coaster of chaos and emotions and chronic stress. And again, all that may seem to the outside observer may seem like, why would that bring grief? Why would that be a sense of loss? Because shouldn't you be glad to be done with all of that? But it's just important to know that may be what your loved one is feeling. Along with that change in lifestyle may come the loss of particular relationships. So, for example, a relationship with a dealer, may be a really unhealthy relationship, but it may have been very predictable. It may be the one person in that person's life that does show up for them in a reliable way. Going to a bar and having a sense of belonging, having a sense of connection with other people, even if you don't know them, it still is a sense of social connection and relationship. So there may be a sense of loss there. In active use, there's often a loss of trust in yourself and in other people. In recovery, sometimes there's a sense of loss around, well, when I was out running around and in active use, I could do whatever I wanted to. And now I've got to be accountable to people. Now I've got to show up. And sometimes that new structure in life, although usually it's exactly what the person has really needed and often been searching for, sometimes there's a sense of being boxed in and not having as much freedom. And there can be a sense of loss around that. And again, a loss of predictability. So as chaotic as active use usually is, there can be a sense of, well, that's the chaos I knew. Yeah, it was unhealthy, but at least I knew what to expect from it. And so now, as I'm working on relationships, working on rebuilding things, I don't know what to expect. Things are changing, and that feels uncomfortable. And so sometimes there's a loss there. So there may be actual death, loss of friends, loss of loved ones to substance use, overdose, or self-harming behavior that comes as a result of substance use. There often is a loss of a sense of a moral center. So often when individuals get really in the deepest parts of addiction, there's this sense of, okay, I have stepped over all of my own values and boundaries. I keep saying, I'm not going to do this anymore, or I'm not going to hurt this person, or I'm not going to steal, or I'm not going to lie. All of these values that guide their lives, but then they find themselves just continuing to step over them in pursuit of whatever the substance is. And that can be really devastating to your identity, your sense of self-worth, your sense of who you are as a person and who you are in relationships. Along with all of this can come a loss of your support system, because often you become very isolated or kind of drive your support people away, push them away. That's part of how addiction thrives, is if I push all my support people away and then it's just me by myself, then, the addiction can run rampant. And along with all of this is a loss of respect, loss of trust, and that's again of other people, but also of self. So all of this and more are different ways that loss may be experienced by a person who's struggling with substance use, somebody who's in active or in an early recovery. And it's just important to know this may be what they're grappling with. If you're trying to support someone, then just know that all of those emotions that we talked about that can come along with grief, if you've got all these different layers and levels of loss, that can be a very complex emotional place to be in and to try to figure out. So now let's look at some loss that may be experienced by family and by loved ones, by those support people who are really trying to help another one with their struggles with substance use or help support in recovery. So there may be, again, actual loss of someone through death due to substance use, or due to kind of the ripple effect of substance use. So for example, it may not be that a loved one dies specifically due to an overdose by IV use, but it may be that because of that IV use, that intravenous use of a drug, infection came in through the needle site and set in their heart, and that they died of heart complications, but really the root cause was the drug use. So again, all of that just becomes very complex. If your loved one who's struggling with substance use or is in recovery is a parent, you might feel like you lost your childhood. You know, while they were in their chaos, there's a lot of impact on children who grow up in families where substance use is an issue. That could also be true for the person who was struggling with substance use. They may have started use very early. You know, sometimes use will start as a result or as a response to some traumatic experience in childhood, and then active use will start around age 11 or 12 or 13. You might feel like you have lost a part of your growing up time. For many family and loved ones, there's a sense of a loss of safety, a loss of time. You know, look at all of these years that we have spent trying to help this person or trying to keep the rest of the world from knowing about this big problem that we have. Just that sense of like I've lost all this time. There might be a loss of connection. You know, as typically as the individual becomes more isolated in their addiction, families and loved ones also often become isolated. So that loss of connection with other people. There might be a loss of opportunities. Often there may be job opportunities that were lost, or the opportunity to move somewhere else, or have other relationships form with other support people, but because of that isolation, it feels like you can't take those opportunities. For some people, for some support people, becoming the fixer, becoming the person who jumps in and saves and rescues the person struggling with substance use. Sometimes when that person gets in recovery, it can feel like that role as rescuer has been lost, or at the very least changes. And that can be a form of grief. Who am I to this person now? Who am I in the family? Maybe I was always the one that held everything together, but now my loved one is starting to show up and they're being involved in things, and I don't have to jump in and rescue, but now what do I do? And that can be challenging. Again, loss of predictability. So it's another counterintuitive thing. You know, most people would say, most loved ones and support people would say, I don't want all this chaos in my life, all of this chaos that's brought in by this other person's substance use. But for many people, to change and move away from that might be scary, because at least that's the chaos that I know. I don't like it, but at least I know how to do that part. And I don't know how to do us in this change process. I don't know how to do us with you in recovery. So that can be challenging. Along with the loss of that rescuer role can come the loss of the scapegoat. And the scapegoat is the person who takes on the responsibility for all of the family problems. So let's say that I've got a loved one who is, is struggling with substance use, and they're making lots of poor decisions. So when things go wrong in the family, I can just point to that and say, well, if you would stop drinking, we wouldn't have any of these problems. If you would stop using, everything would be okay. Well, sometimes what families and loved ones discover is, so that, let's say that person gets into recovery, they do stop drinking, they do stop using. But then what everybody discovers is all of these problems that we thought would go away when the substance use stopped, they're still there. Or at least some of them are still there. The communication challenges are still there. The trust issues are still there. The connection challenges are still there. But now I don't have anybody to blame all that on, because what we had identified as the main problem has gone away, or it is going away, or is being taken care of. And so that scapegoat role has shifted, my rescuer role has shifted, and now who are we to each other? So, along with the loss of time that we talked about a little bit ago, is also potentially a change in how you see your life purpose or the purpose of the relationship or the imagined future together. Or if that person is not in recovery, but they are still in active use, that loss of imagined future may feel very, very heavy. You know, that sense of, you know, I didn't marry this person in order to have a life like this. What about the future that we had planned together 20 years ago? You know, what about we were going to retire together, we were going to travel together, we were going to have kids together, you know, all of the things that maybe you had imagined along with this person, or even if it's your own child, your imagined future for them. You know, I thought you were going to grow up and go to college. I thought you were going to have a wonderful life for yourself and have your own family. And all I see is that you are in the throes of addiction, and you're unhealthy and you're isolated, and none of this stuff that I pictured for you in your future is coming true. And that loss of an imagined future is often a very painful source of grief, because it's not just about grieving what's actually happening, grieving the loss that you see right in front of you or that you're experiencing. It's grieving the loss of something that was yet to happen, something that you had hoped would happen. And with all of this, sometimes there is a loss of relationship. Sometimes the relationship simply has to end as a result of all of the damage that has been done. And there can be a lot of grief around that. So in recovery, and this is true whether it's the person who has been struggling with active use and has now gotten into recovery, and this is also true for families and support people. In recovery, it's important to really start taking a look at grief and its impact, and maybe things that have been pushed down for a long time. So a couple things to think about is the importance of learning to even identify what's going on. That big tangle of emotions that we've talked about that can feel so overwhelming, learning to be able to say, okay, right now, I think what I'm feeling is sadness, or I think what I'm feeling is resentment. Those are two different things. And even I think what I'm feeling is anger versus resentment. Those are also two different things. Sometimes anger will come up as a shield, a protective shield against other emotions that feel really vulnerable and maybe even scary to allow yourself to feel. So learning to really pinpoint what emotion you are feeling is really critical. And then once you have identified that, learning to express it in a way that's safe and with people that are safe. So this comes back to really the importance of building a support network around you, whether it is you as the person struggling with active use, or you as the person who is supporting that person, or a family member or a friend or a loved one. Finding people who know what you're going through and who are safe to express these emotions to is critical. So that may be in therapy, that may be in support groups, AA, NA, Al-Anon, Families Anonymous. It may be in letting people who are already in your network, family and friends, letting them know what you've been going through all this time, and kind of bringing them in and starting to express your emotions to them if they're safe. That's a really important thing to consider. If they're safe. Not all relationships, even those that you've been in for a long time, are initially safe to do this kind of emotional work. It's also important to deal with any kind of shame that might come along with all of these experiences. So Guilt, we mentioned earlier, guilt may be an emotion that comes up, like, I should have done this, I should have, what if I had drawn a boundary earlier? What if I had communicated differently? What if I had left the relationship sooner? All of that kind of, I should have done something different. Well, there's a big difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is about something that you've done or could have done differently. Shame is about who you are. So who you are as a person, who you are in a relationship. Guilt can be an important motivating emotion. If I feel guilty about something, then maybe that will motivate me to do something different, deal with it in a different way, take accountability for my actions, do something different in the future. Shame is about who I am. And shame, there often is a lot of shame for both individuals and families who are dealing with substance use related issues. And the shame will often tell messages like, internal messages like, I'm a failure. This family is doomed. It's my fault that this other person is using, or that their life has gone the way it is. It's my fault because I was a bad parent, or I was a bad spouse. And all those are shame messages, and it's really important to grapple with them and do some work around them, because shame can just keep us really stuck. So along with all of that work, you may find that it's important to let it go, in the sense of allow yourself to breathe. Allow yourself to really feel the emotions that need to be felt, and allow them to pass through you so that you can move through the grieving process and come to that place of acceptance and hope. And it's important to know that for many people, the grieving process doesn't end. It never comes to like a complete feeling of resolution, or, okay, now I'm done with that, I'll never have to feel any grief emotions again. I have personal loss that happened years ago, and at certain points of the year, like anniversaries, people's birthdays, when their memories kind of come up for me more strongly, some of the grief emotions come right back with them. It's lessened. The intensity has lessened, but some of that grief is still there, and I think will always be there, because I will always experience a loss around that. So letting it go is not with the idea that, okay, I'm gonna finally and once and for all let myself experience all these emotions and then I'll be done. It's more about allowing you to let go of the sense of control, holding tight the emotions, and rather let yourself express them. And along with that, so it's important to let it out, let it go, and it's also important to let it in. So often we put these barriers to grief, that put these like emotional walls up around ourselves to try to protect ourselves. It makes sense, because grief can, feel very uncomfortable or painful. And so the idea of like, why should I allow that in? Why should I let that in and experience that? May also seem counterintuitive. But grief is a normal human emotional process. It's part of what it means to be human and to connect with other people and to experience love and to experience loss. So to let yourself experience that can reduce a lot of emotional pain, even physical pain, sometimes grief that is left kind of stuck in our bodies can have a big physical impact. So allowing yourself in a safe way to go ahead and experience these grief emotions can allow you the opportunity to move forward in life in a different way, in a way that's healthier, more open, more trusting of new relationships or old relationships, allowing them to come back into your life in a healthier way, more trusting of yourself, more an increased sense of safety in connecting with others. Sometimes grief that we don't let ourselves experience and process then serves as a barrier to future connection and to future relationship. So with all of this in mind, I hope that you will be gentle with yourself. I hope that if any of this resonated with you, like, yeah, I experience a lot of that loss and I really need to work with it, work on it. I hope that you will reach out for support. At the Morton Center, we have a whole team of people who can help you process this in different ways. So I hope that you'll reach out to us, and if not to us, to somebody who already feels like a safe person to you to start that process. So thank you for joining us today as we looked at grief and the impact of grief on recovery and what is experienced in periods of active use. And I hope that you will join us again for some other topics in the future. Thank you.